Why emotionally intelligent people feel alone. The loneliness that has no name. You understand people better than they understand themselves, and somehow that makes you feel more alone. Not less. More. That is the contradiction nobody warns you about. You are perceptive. You feel deeply. You can walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional undercurrent beneath every conversation, every forced smile, every word trying to say something other than what it means. You notice what people are protecting. You feel what they cannot say. You understand almost involuntarily the hidden architecture of other people's inner worlds. And yet, you go home alone, not always physically, but internally, always. There is a version of loneliness that therapy does not quite reach, that friendships do not quite solve, that staying busy only temporarily suspends. You have opened up to people, only to feel the conversation quietly shift to safer ground. You have shared something real and watched it get met with something rehearsed. You have been in relationships, some of them close, some of them loving, and still felt an invisible wall between your actual self and the version of you that other people seem comfortable receiving. So you adapted. You learned to edit yourself before speaking, to measure how much depth is acceptable in a given moment, to translate your inner experience into something lighter, simpler, more digestible, because the unfiltered version of what you actually feel tends to make people uncomfortable, distant, or quietly afraid. Every time you compress yourself to fit a space that was never built for your full emotional reality, you move further away from the possibility of being truly known. You become fluent in a language that is not your own, while your native tongue, the one that carries your actual depth, your actual pain, your actual way of experiencing life, goes unspoken for so long that you begin to wonder if anyone will ever be capable of hearing it. This is not social anxiety. It is not introversion. It is not a communication problem. It is something structurally different. Emotionally intelligent people do not simply feel more. They perceive more, process more, and carry more, in silence, because the world has given them very little evidence that it can hold the weight of what they actually experience. The loneliness you feel is not a sign that you have failed at connection. It is a precise psychological consequence of being built for a depth that most people around you were never looking for. You have spent a long time trying to solve a problem that was never really yours to solve. You blamed yourself for the distance. You tried to become easier, warmer, more available, and the loneliness remained, because you were treating the symptom while the actual mechanism continued operating beneath the surface, invisible and unnamed. This video is not going to tell you how to fix it. It is going to show you what it actually is, because sometimes when you finally see something clearly, when you finally have the precise language for an experience you have carried your whole life, the weight of it changes. Not because the loneliness disappears, but because you stop being confused by it. You stop blaming yourself for it. You have been asking the wrong question. The question was never, why can't I connect? The real question is far more specific, far more uncomfortable, and far more liberating once you are willing to look directly at it. You feel too much to fit anywhere. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from feeling too much in spaces that were never built to hold it. You have probably spent years interpreting this as a personal deficiency, as if the solution is to feel less, react less, need less, to compress the full spectrum of your inner experience into something more socially convenient. When you walk into a room, you do not just enter a physical space, you enter an emotional one. You register the tension between two people who are pretending everything is fine. You feel the quiet sadness underneath someone's laughter. You sense the anxiety in a voice that sounds calm to everyone else. You pick up on the unspoken, the unresolved, the carefully hidden, not because you are looking for it, but because your nervous system processes emotional information the way other people process language. Automatically, involuntarily, constantly. Most people experience emotion as a response. You experience it as an environment. The difference is not small. It is the difference between someone who gets wet when it rains and someone who feels the pressure change in the atmosphere hours before the storm arrives. One person brings an umbrella, the other cannot stop feeling the sky. Research in emotional neuroscience shows that individuals with high emotional intelligence demonstrate heightened activity in neural circuits, responsible for social cognition, empathy, and interoception. What this means in practice is that the emotionally intelligent person is not simply more aware. They are more exposed. The same sensitivity that allows them to deeply understand others also means they absorb more, process more, and carry more, often without any conscious choice. Most social environments are not designed for that level of emotional presence. They are designed for comfortable shallowness, for conversations that stay within agreed-upon boundaries, for connections that remain pleasant without becoming real. You have felt the edge of that boundary your entire life. You know the exact moment when the other person begins to get uncomfortable, when the depth you naturally bring feels like too much for the space, when eyes shift slightly, when the subject quietly changes, when someone reaches for humor to relieve a tension you were not even aware you had created simply by being present and honest. So you learn to pull back, quietly, almost imperceptibly. You learn to hold the door open to your real self and then close it again before anyone walks through. You learn to speak at a volume the room can tolerate. The tragedy is not that people reject you. The tragedy is that they accept a version of you that you built specifically for their comfort, and you are left wondering whether the real version would have been accepted at all. That question is what feeds the loneliness. Not absence of people, but the chronic, quiet suspicion that the self you actually are, unfiltered, unedited, fully felt, is simply too much for the world you are living in. You were not broken by this realization. You were shaped by it. And understanding that shaping is the first step towards something that is not a cure, but far more valuable than a cure. It is clarity. The hidden cost of always understanding others. At some point, your ability to understand people stopped feeling like a gift and started feeling like a responsibility you never agreed to carry. These things rarely announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, one conversation at a time, until one day you look up and realize you have spent an enormous amount of your life holding space for other people's emotional worlds, while your own remains largely unvisited. When you are deeply attuned to others, you develop what psychologists call an empathic orientation, a baseline tendency to prioritize the emotional landscape of others in social interactions. It is a trained pattern, reinforced over years of noticing that when you pay attention to what others are feeling, interactions go more smoothly. People feel understood. Conflicts de-escalate. You become someone others want to be around. What this creates, over time, is a profound asymmetry. You become extraordinarily skilled at receiving others, holding their pain, understanding their patterns, reflecting their experience back with a precision most people rarely encounter. And in doing so, you quietly train the people around you to be received, not to receive. They learn that your emotional needs are somehow less urgent, or simply less visible, than their own. And you allow this. Not because you are weak, but because being understood is so rare for you that you have stopped expecting it, because giving feels more natural than asking. So the dynamic calcifies. You become the one who asks the right questions, the one who notices when someone is not okay before they know it themselves, the one who holds, absorbs, witnesses, and almost never asks to be held in return. Not because no one offers, but because when they do, their capacity to receive the full weight of what you carry is so visibly limited that protecting them from it feels like the kinder choice. It is no longer just about not being understood. It is about having become so fluent in the emotional language of others that you have quietly forgotten the ability to advocate for your own emotional reality. You have optimized yourself for giving and created a life where receiving feels foreign, almost inappropriate. From the outside, you have deep relationships. People love you. You are present, attentive, emotionally available. And from the inside, you are utterly alone. Because connection, for you, has never been about presence. It has always been about being met. And the experience of being truly met, of having someone turn toward you with the same quality of attention you naturally offer others, is so rare that some part of you has quietly stopped believing it is possible. That belief is not the truth. but it is the wound. And understanding where it came from is the only way to begin to move through it. Why you learned to make yourself smaller. You did not wake up one day and decide to hide. It happened in increments, in small, almost invisible moments of social feedback that accumulated over years into deeply held convictions about how much of yourself was safe to bring into any given relationship. Someone laughed at something you said with complete sincerity. A parent told you that you were being too sensitive. A friend changed the subject when the conversation got too real. A teacher praised you for being mature and composed, which meant, in the unspoken language of that moment, that the version of you that did not create emotional complexity was the version worth rewarding. None of these moments were catastrophic. That is precisely what makes them so effective. Trauma that announces itself can be named and processed, but the slow, consistent pressure of a world that rewards your edited self and grows uncomfortable with your real one, that kind of shaping happens beneath the threshold of awareness. You do not remember deciding to become smaller. You simply noticed, over and over again, that smaller was easier. That smaller kept people close and prevented the specific kind of abandonment that comes not when someone leaves, but when someone stays and stops seeing you. Psychologists refer to this as the development of a false self, a persona built not out of deception, but out of adaptation. It is not that you are performing a lie. It is that you have been performing a simplified truth for so long that the performance has become automatic and the fuller truth has retreated so far inward that even you sometimes struggle to access it. The very depth that makes you capable of extraordinary connection, your sensitivity, your emotional intelligence, is the same depth that the world consistently signaled was too much, too intense, too heavy, too real. So you learned to present the parts of yourself that land well and quietly hold back the parts that don't. You developed a finely tuned sensor for the exact moment when your realness was about to exceed someone else's capacity, and you learned to stop just before that moment arrived. Because when you make yourself smaller to fit a space, two things happen simultaneously. The space becomes comfortable, and you become invisible inside it. People relax around the edited version of you. They feel safe with it, fond of it, even dependent on it. And the real version, the one that feels more, sees more, needs more, waits in a silence that grows heavier with every passing year. That waiting is the loneliness, not the absence of people, the presence of people who love a version of you that you had to diminish yourself to create. The exhaustion nobody sees. You are tired in a way that sleep does not fix. From the outside, there is often no visible reason for the fatigue. You are not overworking in any conventional sense, and yet there is a chronic, bone-deep weariness that follows you through your days, that makes simple social interactions feel disproportionately draining, that leaves you needing hours of solitude to recover from experiences that other people seem to move through without any residue at all. What you are experiencing is the cumulative cost of emotional labor, real, measurable, and almost entirely invisible to the people around you. Every social interaction, for a person with high emotional intelligence, involves a kind of parallel processing that most people never perform. While engaged in surface-level conversation, you are simultaneously tracking the emotional subtext of everything being said and unsaid, monitoring body language, tone shifts, micro-expressions, sensing the emotional temperature of the room, calibrating your own responses in real time. And you are doing this automatically, continuously, and largely without credit. Research on emotional labor, a term coined by sociologist Arlie Hochschild, demonstrates that managing emotional expression requires genuine cognitive and physiological resources. It activates the prefrontal cortex, engages the autonomic nervous system, and draws on executive function in ways that accumulate over the course of a day, a week, a lifetime. For emotionally intelligent people, this cost is multiplied. You are not just managing your own emotional expression. You are absorbing and processing the emotional states of others. You leave a difficult conversation carrying not only your own feelings, but residues of the other person's anxiety, their unresolved conflict, their unexpressed grief. And the loneliness embedded in this exhaustion is specific. The friend who vented for 2 hours and felt relieved goes home lighter. You go home heavier. The colleague whose anxiety you quietly absorbed never noticed your effort. The partner whose mood you carefully managed all evening has no concept of the internal work that required. You gave something real, and it went entirely unseen. Over time, this creates a profound sense of emotional invisibility. The feeling that your inner life is perpetually in service of others while remaining fundamentally unacknowledged. That invisibility, compounded over years, becomes its own form of loneliness. The loneliness of someone who is always present for others and rarely, if ever, truly present for themselves. Depth-seeking in a surface world. You do not want more conversations. You want different ones. The assumption, both cultural and therapeutic, is that loneliness is a quantity problem, that the solution is more connection, more interaction, more time with people. Join a club. Go to more events. Be more open. But for emotionally intelligent people, loneliness is not a quantity problem. It is a quality problem. And no amount of surface-level interaction resolves a hunger that is specifically, structurally, about depth. You have probably sat across from someone at a dinner table, someone who likes you, someone you genuinely like, and felt the frustration of a conversation that keeps returning to the shallows every time you try to take it somewhere real. Not because the other person is unintelligent or unkind, but because they are comfortable at the surface and you are not. Depth-seeking is not simply a preference. It is a need, as real and legitimate as the need for physical safety or social belonging. Research in self-determination theory identifies relatedness, the experience of genuine mutual understanding, as one of the fundamental psychological requirements for human well-being. Not pleasurable interaction, not frequent contact. Genuine understanding. For emotionally intelligent people, the bar is different because their capacity for depth means they can sense with uncomfortable precision the difference between connection and the performance of connection, between being known and being liked. We live in a culture that rewards quick, efficient social interaction. Small talk serves a function, but for someone who experiences the absence of depth as a physical sensation, as actual hunger, small talk is not neutral. It is actively depleting. It creates the form of connection without the substance, which is sometimes worse than no connection at all. This is why emotionally intelligent people often describe feeling lonelier in social situations than when they are alone. Solitude, at least, is honest. There is no pretense, no performance required. Alone, you can exist at your actual depth, without the exhausting social contract that requires you to constantly translate yourself into something more accessible. The need for depth is not something to be apologized for. It is a legitimate psychological need that has been systematically undervalued by a culture that mistakes availability for connection and volume for meaning. And the recognition of that need, clear-eyed without self-blame, is the beginning of understanding what you are actually looking for. The mask you forgot you were wearing. There is a version of you that most people know, and there is a version of you that almost no one has ever met. The distance between those two versions is not dishonesty. It is the accumulated result of years of social adaptation, of learning which parts of yourself the world is equipped to receive, and which parts need to be managed before they can be presented. The persona you developed, warmer in tone than your actual emotional state, lighter than your actual weight, more composed than your actual pain, was built slowly, layer by layer, in response to real social feedback from real relationships. And it works. That is what makes it so difficult to question. But there is a cost to wearing a mask for long enough, and it is not the cost most people assume. The cost is not that the mask becomes uncomfortable. It is that the mask becomes invisible, even to you. You adapted so thoroughly, so skillfully, and so early that the adaptation became identity. The edited version became the default. The real version, the one that feels more, needs more, sees more, became something you visit in solitude and then carefully pack away before re-entering the world. Carl Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to meet the expectations of our environment. His insight was not that the persona is false. It is that when we identify with it completely, when we forget that we are wearing it, We become cut off from the deeper self it was designed to protect. And that disconnection is its own form of loneliness. Not loneliness from others, loneliness from yourself. The experience of sitting in a room full of people who know your persona, who love your persona, and feeling profoundly alone is not irrational. It is the precise consequence of being surrounded by people who know the map and have never seen the territory. They are connected to a representation of you, and somewhere, quietly, you know it. You can have a 10-year friendship, a marriage, a family, and still carry the specific ache of someone who has never been fully witnessed. Because the quality of being known is not determined by the duration of the relationship. It is determined by how much of the actual self was ever brought into it. That rediscovery is uncomfortable. It is also necessary. Because the life lived entirely inside a persona, however sophisticated, however functional, however beloved, is a life lived at a remove from your own existence. And you have been there long enough. When empathy becomes a prison. Empathy is one of the most celebrated qualities a person can possess. And it is all of those things, genuinely, importantly, in the right conditions. But there is another side to empathy that almost no one talks about. For people with high emotional intelligence, that other side is not a minor footnote. It is a central feature of their daily experience. Empathy, when it operates without boundaries, when it is not a conscious choice but an automatic orientation, does not just allow you to feel with others. It requires you to. You do not decide to absorb someone else's pain. You simply find that you have. You arrive home carrying an emotional atmosphere you cannot fully identify or locate. This is what psychologists call empathic overarousal, a state in which empathic resonance exceeds the individual's ability to regulate the emotional input they are receiving. It is distinct from compassion, which allows you to care about another person's suffering while maintaining a clear boundary between their experience and your own. Empathic overarousal dissolves that boundary. You do not feel for someone, you feel as them. When your empathic response is automatic and unbounded, other people's emotional needs become your emergency. You respond with urgency, with priority, with the full deployment of your emotional resources, not by conscious decision, but because your nervous system has already classified it as a problem that needs solving. Your own emotional needs feel less urgent, not because they are less real, but because they are yours. You can tolerate your own pain in a way you cannot tolerate someone else's, so you defer. You tell yourself you will return to your own inner world later, after this person is okay, after everyone else has what they need. Later rarely comes. What accumulates instead is a quiet, chronic erasure of the self, a life organized around other people's emotional realities in which your own becomes progressively harder to access. And the loneliness that emerges is among the most painful variants we have explored. Because it is not just the loneliness of being unseen by others. It is the loneliness of having become, in some fundamental way, unseen by yourself. The prison empathy builds is not made of cruelty or exploitation. It is made of the gradual, invisible erosion of your own interior life through the endless, well-intentioned prioritization of everyone else's. It is simply an invitation to notice where you have disappeared to, and to consider what it might look like to bring the same quality of presence to yourself that you have spent a lifetime offering to others. The fear of being truly seen. We have spent the previous chapters exploring how the world fails to see emotionally intelligent people clearly, but now we need to turn towards something more uncomfortable. Because the fear of being seen does not only come from outside, it lives inside you too. And in some ways, in the ways that matter most, the fear you carry about being truly known is more powerful than anything the external world has ever done to keep you hidden. You have spent years editing yourself, calibrating, adapting, presenting the version of yourself that the world can comfortably receive. And somewhere in that process, a belief formed. Rarely examined, rarely articulated, but operating with extraordinary power beneath the surface of every relationship you attempt. The belief is this: if people could see all of me, not the edited version, not the persona, but the full, unfiltered reality of what I actually feel,
need, and carry, they would leave. Or they would be overwhelmed. Or they would no longer see me as strong. Or they would simply not know what to do with me. And the discomfort of that would quietly end whatever we had built. You may never have said this in those words, but it is there. You can feel it in the microsecond hesitation before you say something real. In the way you begin a vulnerable sentence and then soften it midway through. In the instinct to follow genuine emotional disclosure with a joke, a quick pivot back to safer ground. You do not only fear not being seen, you fear being seen and found inadequate. That fear was learned from specific moments, specific relationships, specific experiences of having brought something real and watched it land wrong. From the times you allowed someone closer and they used what they found to hurt you. From the times you were fully yourself and the response was discomfort, withdrawal, or a silence that told you everything you needed to know. Your emotional intelligence does not protect you from these experiences. In some ways, it amplifies them. Because you perceive the rejection more precisely, carry the memory more completely, and integrate it more deeply into your understanding of what is safe to risk. So you build a very specific kind of wall. Not the aggressive wall of someone who is closed off entirely. The sophisticated wall of someone who remains emotionally present, warm, even intimate, while keeping the final chamber of themselves locked. You let people in far enough to feel connection. You do not let them in far enough to feel seen. The cruel irony is that this wall, the one you built to protect yourself from the pain of not being seen, is the very structure that ensures you will never be seen. You cannot be known through a performance. The self that is managed for presentation is, by definition, not the self that can be genuinely known. And so the loneliness perpetuates itself, not through the world's failure to look, but through the part of you that, even when someone turns toward you with real attention, flinches back. Because being found is indistinguishable, emotionally, from being found out. This is the deepest layer of intelligent loneliness. Not the world's inability to hold you, but your own learned belief that you are at your core too much, and the elaborate, invisible architecture you have built around that belief to keep it from ever being tested. What your loneliness is actually telling you. Everything we have explored has been a map of how this loneliness is built. But now we arrive at something different. Now we ask what it means. Loneliness, like all emotional experience, is not arbitrary. It is not noise. It is signal. And the specific quality of the loneliness that emotionally intelligent people carry, its texture, its persistence, its resistance to conventional solutions, is communicating something with extraordinary precision. Most people, when they feel lonely, interpret the signal as a deficiency report. Something is missing. Something needs to be fixed. This leads naturally to corrective actions, more socializing, more openness, that treat loneliness as a problem to be solved rather than a message to be understood. But this loneliness is not a deficiency report. It is something far more precise. It is a map of your actual needs. When you feel lonely in a conversation that lacks depth, the loneliness is not telling you that you have failed a connection. It is telling you that depth is a genuine psychological requirement, not a luxury, but a fundamental need that this interaction is not meeting. When you feel lonely in a relationship where you are loved but not fully known, the loneliness is a precise signal that being truly known is not something your psychological system can live without indefinitely. When you feel lonely in your own life, not in any specific relationship but in the broader experience of moving through a world calibrated for a shallower register, it is the accurate perception of a real mismatch between the depth of your inner life and what most available environments are offering. Your loneliness is honest. That is what makes it painful, and what makes it valuable. It has been telling you something your conscious mind has been reluctant to fully receive, that the life you have been living, shaped around adaptation and editing and the careful management of your emotional reality for other people's comfort, is not enough for what you actually are. The self you actually are, the full, unedited, deeply feeling, acutely perceptive self, has genuine needs that have been systematically deferred. Needs for depth, for being truly met, for relationships that can hold the full weight of your inner world without flinching. When you stop treating your loneliness as evidence of failure and start treating it as accurate feedback, when you let it be a compass rather than a condemnation, it becomes possible to begin making different choices. Small, deliberate ones. Choices about what conversations to invest in, about which relationships have genuine potential for depth, about when to let someone a little further in, about when to stop editing. Your loneliness is not your enemy. It is the most honest voice inside you, the one that has been quietly insisting, against all social pressure, that you are worth being known. That voice has been right all along. The return to yourself. This is where most videos about loneliness would offer you a solution. They would tell you to find your tribe, to practice vulnerability, to seek therapy, to set boundaries, to communicate your needs more clearly. Some of those things are valuable. None of them are what this chapter is about. What we have been exploring throughout this video is not really a story about loneliness. It is a story about a self that has been, for a very long time, in exile. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, through 1,000 small acts of self-editing, through years of compression, through the slow process of building a life that works, that functions, that is loved, but that does not quite contain the full version of who you actually are. The return to yourself is not the discovery of something new. It is the recognition of something that has been there the entire time, waiting, with a patience that borders on the inexhaustible, for you to stop moving away from it. It begins with honesty, not the honesty of confessions or difficult conversations, and not yet. The quieter honesty of simply acknowledging, in the privacy of your own inner life, what you actually feel. Not the feeling you have decided is appropriate, the actual one, the full one, the one you have been summarizing for other people's comfort for so long that you sometimes encounter it and feel, briefly, like a stranger in your own emotional experience. It continues with permission. Permission to have needs that are not small. Permission to require depth without apologizing for the requirement. Permission to find shallow connection genuinely unsatisfying, not as a flaw to be overcome, but as accurate information about who you are. And it deepens with the most difficult step of all, the gradual, imperfect, genuinely terrifying practice of allowing your actual self to be present in relationships. Not all of it, not immediately, not without discernment, but more of it, incrementally more. Enough to test whether the world you have been protecting yourself from is actually as unprepared for you as you have believed. The loneliness of emotionally intelligent people is real. The mechanisms are real. The exhaustion is real. The asymmetry is real. The fear is real. None of what you have felt has been invented or exaggerated or a sign of weakness. But the conclusion that some part of you has drawn from all of it, the quiet, persistent belief that you are fundamentally too much to be known, is not real. It is a belief built from incomplete evidence, from environments that were too small for what you carry, from relationships that reflected back the limits of their own emotional capacity, rather than the truth of yours. You are not too much. You were simply in the wrong spaces, trying to fit yourself into containers that were never designed for your actual size. The return to yourself is the return to that understanding. It is a return to the self that existed before the editing became automatic. The self that felt fully, perceived fully, needed fully. And the slow, deliberate, imperfect process of bringing that self back into contact with a life that can actually hold it. This will happen in moments. In a conversation where you say the true thing instead of the safe thing and the world does not end. In a relationship where someone turns toward your full weight and does not flinch. In a quiet evening alone, where you stop performing even for yourself and simply exist at your actual depth and feel for a moment something that is not loneliness at all. Something that is, finally, like home. But the place where the loneliness actually breaks, the place where the exile ends, is not out there. It is in the moment you stop being a stranger to yourself. That moment is available to you. It has always been available to you. And it begins, quietly, imperfectly, irreversibly, the moment you decide that the full version of who you are is worth returning to.